What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Third Eye Pry podcast. I am your host, Illuminostic, and what a week it has been for me personally, and for the world at large. I think it's been so tumultuous for so long that people are so jaded. I think that even if aliens are on the floor of Congress, I don't know that people are really going to react that strongly at this point. And it's kind of too bad, I mean, it happens to me over the course of life. You get kind of worn out, and it becomes more and more difficult to stay connected to the mystery and the wonder, and the pursuit of knowledge can seem kind of pointless. Sort of nihilistic existential crisis that just comes from overexposure, rubbed too raw, you know. Um, but luckily, we have Illuminostic here to remind us, and we have psychedelic plants, and we have the mysteries, and we have great authors, and we have great art, and we have great music, and all of these things to keep us inspired and to re-inspire us. And speaking of becoming cynical and jaded, this week, it's interesting how sometimes things can come in a package that contains both. That kind of happened with Morgue yesterday. But yesterday was one of the most important days, I think, in a very long time for me in terms of being able to continue my story and develop my ideas. I've been studying this stuff for years and years and years and years, and it has kind of gotten to the point where there isn't really more scientific illuminism for me to study. There's no more corpus hermeticum. There's no more Timothy Leary. There's no new Robert Anton Wilson books. And when I look around for new stuff to add to that, it all just seems like regurgitations of the old stuff that's watered down for a modern audience that has the attention span of, I don't know what, not a human in the way, in general. People have very short attention spans now, and intellectual laziness is such that, yeah, I mean, that's pop culture to me is very watered down version of the mysteries. And there's a reason that that's a problem. I'm not just trying to be a snob about it. I'm not trying to be pretentious. It's just that it should be an art and a science, metaphysics. And it seems like it's devolved to the point where it's really just a lot of people with opinions and people that believe in their imagination, and then their ego gets attached to their imagination, and there's no reason or logic involved in the process. It is just ego and imagination and, popular ideas that have been absorbed. And the mystery tradition that I'm a fan of, I guess, the methodology is very exacting, and very little makes it through the process of separating the wheat from the chaff. Um, and that's why, I really encourage my audience to try to be courageous and confident. And, a lot of us limit ourselves because we have self-esteem issues and self-confidence issues. I did that to myself for decades. And it's not actually that you're too stupid to take your knowledge to the next level. It is just that you are, you have beliefs about yourself that limit your ability to process information. And what I'm discovering is that the quantity is kind of irrelevant, right? So say a subject like morphology or isomorphs, and we're talking about like medium grade difficulty sciences, not calculus or trigonometry, but somewhere in the middle there. When you start to look at the quantity of information that's required, it can seem daunting. But in reality, if you just take everything one bit at a time and don't even consider how many details there are, it's just like anything else that you absorb. So, I'm just basically trying to share that in my experience, the overcoming intellectual laziness is really not even a very difficult process once you make it over the first hurdle, which is usually, in my experience, self-esteem. The Discord link actually is in the descriptions now. By the way, you guys do hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider supporting. I'm demonetized. I don't get anything for my efforts. There are options in the chat. I want to thank Austin for sending us some support yesterday. And we have new patrons. I need to mention at least one new patron. It's going to be an interesting stream, though, so have patience. Moshe, in case I didn't... I don't know if Moshe Morgan. I'm assuming that you're female, but either way, thank you. It's not clear from the name, but thank you for becoming a patron, and you guys get access to secret streams, and we have been going into extreme depth about alchemy. In fact, in the last one, the actual process, step by step, that is supposed to be top secret was given in plain language. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it, but it was all spelled out for my patrons very plainly. Okay, so where do we start here? I guess, I'm going to warn you guys that I'm going to throw Morgue under the bus before this is over with. And I'm disappointed to have to do so, but my hands are tied because I have endorsed him in the past, and I came across some revelations. I'm actually very thankful. That's what I was mentioning earlier about how sometimes the same bundle of information can make you feel more jaded and inspired at the same time. But you just have to push past the hard parts, because it is because of the discoveries that I made about Morgue that I yielded some of the most important information and unexpected revelations that, I did not think I was going to pull this off in my lifetime. And it is solely because of Morgue's fraudulent behavior that I was able to do that. So, you know what I mean? We'll get to that in more detail. But I want to share something about the stream that's coming tomorrow on... this is just my term, so I don't even remember it. Temporal isomorphism. That's what I'm calling it. Temporal isomorphism. And what happened with this is that sometime a few years ago, I was trying to imagine how it is that the electromagnetic wave was able to compel the chaotic energy of the primordial soup to order. And it did that by means of symmetry. And that's how you have to do this, one little step at a time, if you're trying to visualize it and understand. And so I understood that an oscillating wave, if you draw a line in the center, it's symmetrical on either side. So it makes sense that it has this dualistic symmetry. And I'm thinking of all of the constituent elements of the universe being arranged in that way on the subatomic level, but also on the very, very large scales in the same way. You can kind of see the oscillations of this wave in the greater patterns of, seasons and the sort of scale, like the Baktuns of the Mayans, 26,000 year cycles and whatever else. This oscillation of this wave is what causes these repetitions. For one thing, it creates the patterns, because in order to have a pattern, you must have repetition, or otherwise there's no pattern. Repetitions with variation. And so I've always been looking for a physical basis for synchronicity, because it's a very strange thing to try to come to terms with. In fact, this is why Jung is so widely criticized, or at least his idea of he's criticized for a lot of stuff, but synchronicity is a big one, because it is very difficult to establish that meaning can have an external relevance and an internal relevance that isn't a product of our psyche and nothing more. And of course, it doesn't take a super genius to think, well, there's some sort of higher order of symmetry. And that's, that occurred to me many years ago. This is some kind of higher order of symmetry. And it has to be structural, because impossible things don't happen. right? In illuminated thinking, impossible things do not happen. It has to have some kind of mechanistic basis for something to occur or for something to exist. So, for example, when I had the experience with the ruler with 2 11s on it while we were talking about the numerology of the number 11, and then a few weeks later, Golden Light Eagle, who I need to mention, actually, I just found out he passed away in 2021, and I did not hear about it. So probably on Sunday, I'm going to do a very belated trip down memory lane and talk a little bit about my experiences with Golden Light Eagle. I've mentioned him a bunch of times. I was really sad to see that he had died. He was a pretty important figure in a very important part of my life. So that was kind of a bit of a shocker to discover today. But then right after the ruler experience, we went to go and meet with Golden Light Eagle, and he's talking about the 1111 frequencies. And so there were these synchronicities, but then they were also linked to later events, which is the trans-temporal aspect of this higher order of symmetry being expressed. But the point is that ruler was a physical thing. And when you experience a synchronicity, it's not like the physical thing can just materialize out of magic because there's a god there playing games with you or some kind of crazy shit like that. That's not how it works. And again, this is kind of the difference between scientific illuminism and the practice of the mystery school adepts versus like pop culture spirituality, where people just kind of think of stuff and believe it, and that's how that works. You know what I mean? That's why that stuff is kind of dangerous, because you can very easily come up with explanations that couldn't possibly be true, and then when that happens, it's like you're creating a breadcrumb trail into nothingness, and it's just a waste of energy and potential. So that's why we dissuade from that kind of spiritual approach, not because we are mean, but because it's just a waste of potential. So anyways, there has to be some kind of explanation for how the symmetry is sort of imbued into the substructure of our existence. And the glyph 1111 gives us a bit of a clue, right? We have the 2 1s on the inside, which represent the unity of the white and black, or masculine and feminine, or positive and negative, really. The 2 pillars of Jachin and Boaz in the middle pillar ritual. And then the other 11 are the... So those are the 2 internal, right? Because still everything contains its contradiction. So these 2, dualistic corollaries are representative of the opposites that we contain, and then also the external world. So 111 is the internal world, the other 11 is the external world. And there are clues to the validity of this, even in like string theory, where they've posited 11 dimensions, which corresponds to the Kabbalistic tree of life, having 10 real sephira, but there's actually an 11th called Da'at, which is knowledge, and it's drawn on with a faint line, usually, or a dotted line, so you can tell it's not really there. It's just kind of an implied sephirot, because knowledge is just relation, and it's not like a real thing. It's perception, and it's your relative, whatever, you guys get it. But there's that 11 again, in a dimensional sense. And there's a whole lot of other stuff. There's that number has functions in magic and every system you can think of. Aleister Crowley, of course, was like 11 is the number of the new aeon. Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law is an 11-word phrase. The word abrahadabra, which actually does in Hebrew mean basically to speak into existence. And it's an 11-letter word if you write it in English. So it's just a ton of stuff. But the fundamental and most important thing, I think, is that glyph of 1111 represents that supersymmetry, which is a misappropriation of terms. Of course, the supersymmetry of physics is not what I mean. I'm just talking about a higher order of symmetry. And it turns out that this idea that I've been chasing goes back to, I bet most of you guys can probably guess what I'm about to say, Pythagoras. Because of course it does. Because everything, all of this stuff that I talk about, basically you can trace all of it back to the Pythagorean Illuminati. And it's not because I've taken it all, and I'm not talking about the guy that writes the books. That's a different thing. I'm talking about the actual secret society of Pythagoras back in Greece. And it's not because I have gotten a hold of their doctrine and I'm using it. I have studied the shreds and pieces of it that have manifested in the Kabbalion and all of these other places over the centuries. But it's just literally you just come to understand this stuff if you are able to acquire and employ the skills of an initiate. That's just like all of us end up seeing the same thing. Whether you're talking about Robert Anton Wilson or James Joyce or just all throughout history, there's examples, plenty of them, where people come to these conclusions completely independent of any kind of input. That's one of the indications we have that it's accurate, right? But so I trace this idea of isomorphs back to Pythagoras, specifically the idea of isomorphic resonance. And so this idea of an oscillating wave imparting symmetry, it turns out that Pythagoras had posited that there is a sort of absolute music that is radiated from, I don't know exactly where yet, the monad, I guess. But the idea is that this is a wave, basically, that interacts with other waves, and it is basically reflective also. And everything is also the proportions are all determined by the original wave. And I'm not going to get into all of it, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys an idea of what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. I don't want to blow the whole stream. But it's just really extraordinary. It's an extraordinary journey for me too, because the way that this stuff happens, I was just sitting at the computer thinking, okay, so higher order of symmetry and synchronicity, punch that in, what do I get? And I see, oh, there's an article by Robert Anton Wilson that I somehow missed. I thought I'd read everything. So I pull up the article and it's called Synchronicity, Isomorphs, and the Implicate Order. So then I'm like, well, what the fuck is the implicate order? So I look up the implicate order and I learn about enfoldment and all this stuff. And then I realize that I already have visual models of the stuff in my head. I just don't have language for it. So and then after I unfold enfoldment and figure out the implicate and explicit order and how they all relate to this stuff, then I'm thinking, well, isomorphs, I wonder if there's any such thing as isomorphic resonance. So I punch it into the computer and I'm looking at Pythagoras, of course, you know what I mean? And I can almost guess what's coming. It's just, it's a lot of fun because it's almost like interpreting a living puzzle. You know, it's like this fucking thread that I'm following is alive and interactive or something. It's hard to describe. Yeah, and by the way, you guys, I've had people ask people to investigate my whether my notifications are working, and some people say yes, but other people say if they turn them on, they will just find them off again on their own. So, at any rate, do you guys want to talk about the Pythagorean Illuminati real quick? I don't really know exactly what this is yet, exactly, but, we have to bring Morgue into the picture in order to get this done. So Morgue and I share a birthday, and I noticed many years ago that Morgue and I share a birthday, and over the years, I've noticed that we talk about very, very similar ideas very, very often. And I thought that was kind of an interesting bit of evidence for astrology because he seemed so ridiculously similar. And then when I found out that he was exactly 10 years to the day younger, I thought, man, this is the only person really that bears this level of resemblance to me. And, he's born on the same day. But then I don't even know how I found this. I think I was looking into the isomorphic resonance and whatnot. But it turns out that Morgue none of his ideas are his own. He's been plagiarizing other people. And I actually noticed a while back that I would post a stream sometimes. And I mean, his following is way, way bigger than mine. So it was hard for me to imagine that he was actually like stealing my ideas. But now that I know what I know, I'm not so sure, because I would post the title and then literally 5 minutes later, I would see that title come up on a live stream for Morgue sometimes, like the same title. But of course, at the time, I just thought, well, it's just because we're like linked somehow or something. But then it turns out that what Morgue has actually done is plagiarized ghostwriter, I guess you would call it, like someone writing under a pseudonym of the name Pythagorean Illuminati. And the other guy writes under the name Adam Weishaupt, who's the founder of the actual original Illuminati, and a mathematician who he took ontological mathematics from that actually sued him to make him stop mentioning it. In case you've noticed that he has stopped, if you watch him, you've noticed he stopped talking about ontological mathematics. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he claims to actually be a high-ranking member of the Illuminati. So I started looking at his stuff, and I would not dispute for a single second that the guy actually is legitimately an Illuminatus. Everything that I would expect to find there is there. And it was very validating for me to discover this, because it's so many of my own ideas and stuff about, you know, what would the Illuminati have been doing? I've always said that, you know, the pop culture perception of the Illuminati is absolutely incorrect. It has nothing to do with Satanism. It has nothing to do with controlling the world. It's exactly the opposite. And it's really, really ironic that people that are so skeptical of the media, so skeptical of the popular narratives, you know, that don't question the fact that maybe they've gotten the exact opposite information about what the Illuminati really is. In fact, if you look at the known examples of Illuminati manuscripts and the papers that they stole from Adam Weishaupt when they arrested him, none of the symbols that they have all over everything that people say, look, all proof of the Illuminati, all these corporations and politicians doing all, there's no indication that any of that stuff is connected to the historical Illuminati. Not even a little bit. And the reason that it got demonized is that Adam Weishaupt wanted to get rid of two things that a lot of right-wing Christians would associate with evil, and one of them is religion, and the other one is borders. So he didn't want to control what people thought necessarily, but he did want to educate people so that they understood that the religions were fabricated as mind control devices, and get rid of superstition and ignorance and teach actual illumination, a process of coming to gnosis of your own accord, and then also get rid of all the borders so there wouldn't be any more wars. And so, you know, in my opinion of the analysis of the actual writings of Adam Weishaupt, not bullshit that people have written on the internet, that honestly, I mean, your average conspiracy theorist trying to understand even the mind of someone like Adam Weishaupt is like an ape trying to figure out how to fly a spaceship. It's just like, they shouldn't even be talking about it. There's no way they have the, you know, cognitive faculties to make any sense of it. So it's, you know, it's just really silly. But at any rate, it was all there. And mathematics to support everything, because the guy is a very, very, very brilliant mathematician, I guess. And interestingly, you know, not very well known, no one seems to question the authenticity of his claim to be a high-ranking member of the Illuminati, because once you see his work, you're like, oh, shit. You know, there's no question about it. Like, if you know what this type of gnosis is, then, you know it when you see it. And this guy has more of it than anyone I've ever seen. And he's not really trying to get famous. The only reason that he went after Morgue, he was just allowing Morgue to take credit for creating it, even though he hadn't. And by the way, there is a video where Morgue gets confronted about this, and he is totally like, he had nothing to say. I mean, in his super chat, if you ask a question, if you pay him, he has to answer the question, right? So somebody asked him, who is, the guy's name is Mike something. I'm sorry, I'll have his name eventually, I'm sure. They asked him, who is this? And he just sort of went blank for a second, started stuttering, and never answered the question. So there was, no question about it at all. And they actually tried to pay him to admit that there was an author behind the mathematical ontological mathematics, and he refused even to be paid to give the guy credit and still be allowed to use the guy's work. So, and in response to the people coming out and trying to expose Morgue, he has sent SWAT teams to their house. He called in false allegations and got them swatted. All three of these ex-cult members. And they have been posting a bunch of stuff from his socials that he said about children and stuff. And so I no longer am endorsing Morgue in any way, shape, or form. I used to kind of like the fact that, there was somebody else out there that talked about a lot of the same types of things that I do, and had the same birthday. I felt like we had some kind of profound connection. But it turns out that, I'm not trying to be boastful here, but I have actually done this myself. You know what I mean? If I speak about somebody else's work, I tend to credit them. If I don't credit them every time, it's because I've already mentioned it several times in the history of my YouTube. You know what I mean? And then, but a lot of it has arisen from my own contemplation and my own work. So it turns out that Morgue isn't a complimentary soul. He's just a fraud. And I don't like that at all. So, and not only that, but it sounds like he's actually doing some pretty bad stuff out there. And the last thing we need, as people trying to redeem the image of scientific illuminism, is to have some weirdo out there doing evil things in the name of scientific illuminism. But here's what happened though. When I started watching these videos and I realized that, he had just plagiarized somebody's work, I was like, well, who the fuck is the Pythagorean Illuminati? So, what is Gorilla Rocket? Is that a crypto or something? Yeah, so they mentioned the Pythagorean Illuminati as the source of his material, the real source. And I went down this rabbit hole trying to figure out who the author was, just everything I could do to try and solve this puzzle. And I guess you guys will see. I mean, I don't know enough yet to really go into too much detail about it. But what it looks like to me is that the actual Illuminati, and the way that I understand the group, like people that have found a way to integrate a scientific approach. When I say that we're trying to find a way to make science and spirituality dovetail, I don't necessarily mean that we're looking for ways to, make proven science fit with spiritual concepts. It's more about using the same level of reason, logic, and testability and scrutiny in our metaphysical and spiritual world as we would in the scientific arena. And oftentimes what that will mean is finding corollaries in geometry and mathematics, and support for that. But of course, you have to be very difficult, because if you have a layman's level of knowledge regarding physics, and you're just really predisposed to misunderstanding something and then finding a correlation in some spiritual or metaphysical concept and making fools of all of us. So you have to get really good at this in order to do it well. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, people are really weird about cult leaders. So, his people are really devoted. When I first found out about him, I got involved in one of his communities a little bit because I knew we were so common. I thought we might share a fan base to some extent. And I didn't know it was a cult yet. And I noticed that people were saying, we believe, we believe. And whenever you see that catchphrase, we believe, something's wrong. That's the first indication. I don't care if it's Christianity, Buddhism, whatever it is. Whenever anyone defines their own, belief system in terms of collective, there's a problem. That's just always a recipe. It's a recipe. It's a recipe for disaster. I thought there was another bit of subject, though, that we needed to move on to here. By the way, you guys, I have a little bit more time, maybe 15 minutes or something. So if any of you guys have questions or whatever, feel free to place them in the chat. I know it seems like every stream I sign out and then I see questions in the chat. So if you're one of those people that's always posing a question that never gets answered, then now would be a good time, because I have a lot of lag and it just takes me a second to see. Yeah. So, by the way, also hit the like button, share, subscribe, join our Patreon, where you can join our secret streams, and you get access to all of the secret streams that have ever happened. So there's all kinds of mountains and mountains and mountains of interesting information. A lot of it I consider too dense and technical and tedious for, public consumption. Be difficult to hold enough people's attention for a public live stream. But if you're serious about these kind of studies, then you're going to really appreciate it. Yeah, the only thing I don't like about "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law" is that it's not that it shall be; it is. It is the whole of the law. Hopefully, we arrive at a point where that can happen collectively. And of course, it's a big pet peeve of mine that so many people think that it means that you can just do whatever you want and be evil and all that sort of thing. But it definitely does not. You are limited by the sovereignty of the will of other people. It's that simple. And this is one of the reasons that I suspect, other than the fact, hey, let's move on to aliens for a second. I suspect very strongly, not accepting, I guess. All of the old prophecies of the Hopi and, just the general consensus, I guess, is that there are some sort of benevolent influences that are waiting for for circumstances to insist on intervention. That's the way I understand it. But I think that as we evolve in consciousness, what I call gnosis or illumination is an inevitable consequence of the development of individuals. And so at some point, the necessity of respecting the sovereignty of the will of other people is just going to be an organic, it's going to be a function of that development. Right? It's not going to be a rule that you impose upon yourself. And a lot of people are scared that there are malevolent entities. I don't know what their definition of malevolent is, because malevolence implies that you don't care about rules. So if there's nothing stopping them, and they have this technology that we've been observing in these top secret videos, then they could wipe out the entire United States Air Force in the blink of an eye, nothing stopping them. And so what are they waiting for? That's got to admit that I don't recall how we got on that subject again, though. Yeah, I feel like I left out a bunch of significant things in regards to the potential alien invasion the other day. I mean, my observation so far, though, is that I'm pretty disappointed in people in general. The Gallon-Kruger effect is in massive display out there. People are talking about how, they couldn't possibly be here because the distances are too vast. That if you know anything about space-time, the way it folds and wormholes, and if you just consider the fact that we are, only having had technology for, it depends on how you define technology, but let's say computer technology for 80 years or something, and really good computer technology for less time, I would say. And you look at where we are with physics and the possibility of age reversal, right? Age reversal is something that is actually happened. It's not theoretical anymore. And our understanding of the nature of time implies all sorts of wacky things that could mean that the non-linear nature of it would allow manipulation of it, or to travel in any direction in it. So there's just so many reasons why, saying that a race of people that have had technology for 10,000 years couldn't just come here. It's just so small-minded and dumb, It's just, you're only proving your own limitations, not the limitations of the aliens, if you're talking like that. It just seems just so preposterously ridiculous to me to assert something like that in the face of, humanity's, this barely thinking monkey has managed to constrain all of these forces to his will, to kindle the same stars, the same energy that lights the stars on his enemies, and potentially extend life indefinitely, mapping the genetic code, discovering quarks and muons and all of this stuff. And there's a gigantic chorus of braying asses in the world. It's getting harder and harder for me to be online at all, which is good, I guess. And the more I'm deterred from being online, the better, I guess, because it just increasingly reminds me of the trend in anti-intellectualism, and also the how effective brainwashing and indoctrination has been, and how it's so easy to get people to think within certain parameters and to never, ever, 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 ever think beyond whatever's dictated by those parameters. It's really wild to me. Not a lot of fun either. I don't particularly enjoy it. By the way, we still do have room in October for the retreat. We're not doing November anymore because I'm going to go to Egypt. And so I wanted to put that out there. I guess that's probably a wrap. I don't really see... I said I was going to talk about aliens, isomorphs, and the Pythagorean Illuminati, and I guess I have done that. So everyone have a wonderful Friday night, and let me know if I can be of service. Don't forget that I do consultations, that you can also make a contribution if you would like me to discuss a subject or make a video on a subject. And join our Patreon, smash like, share the videos, because I need your support. And I'll see you again tomorrow afternoon.